All right, hey guys, we're live again. Hopefully, this is going to work a little better. Right now, I'm emailing you all. Okay, let me. Give me 1 second. I'm sending some emails right now. Okay, one person's on. Hey, there we go. I did end the live stream for those of you, well, for one of you. That I guess two of you know about that. One of you's on right now. I had bad connection, and so I thought it best to stay through. My connection was being really laggy, so I'm gonna wait a minute or two for more people to jump on. So let's see what's up here. And I lost one person. I'm gonna respond to a couple emails. I'm emailing Sam right now. Okay. Sent one to Sam. See who else is on. If you, whoever you are that is on right now, I think, there we go, got two of us on. Hey, those of you that are able to find a live stream, if you could send the info, like text it to your friends that were on before when it ended. Hey, no. Hey, I see Sam's here. What's up, Sam? All right. If you guys could text the link or something to everyone else if you have their info. See who else? Long, what's up, Long? All right, so Sam's here, Long's here. All right, let's see who else is here. There's a third person, and we'll get some more people on. It's not quite as well attended as the last one, but it's great to see you all, and hopefully everyone will get on soon. All right, so Sam and Long are here. Who else is on here? There's a third person on. Waiting. All right, I'm gonna give it like 15 more seconds before I start into what I was talking about before. And then I'll go back into my channel and I'll edit out that other live stream that was a fail of a live stream. All right. 1 second. My son's out here. He wants to say hi to you guys. Hey, Jackson, pop in for a second, buddy. Come on, pop in, buddy. I've got to get to work. This is my son, Jackson. Can you say hi to everybody? Hi. He wanted to say hi to you guys, and he was curious about. All right, there we go. All right, so now we'll get back at it. First thing, I don't know if you guys did. You guys hear the announcement about the AP exam that there will be mobile, like remote exams? Going to offer 2 sessions of remote exams. So I'll give you links to that, or I'll hook you up with that so that, and Wi-Fi is struggling again, so that you'll be able to connect with College Board and get their daily training for the AP exam. So it's coming up really fast, guys. Less than 2 months, so they're working on it. Okay. Now, also, we have a quiz on Monday. It's going to be a short answer quiz on containment and the Korean War, and just containment and international policies and politics, and a little bit with the Vietnam War, but just a review of containment in the Vietnam War. So I know we didn't cover it in detail, but I did mention it in our last live stream, and I mentioned it for a reason because we were going to be talking about that on the upcoming short answer quiz. All right, let's get into chapter 28. So chapter 28 is kind of about the reverse of what's happening now, right? The Dow has plummeted, although it's stabilized, but the Dow in the past couple of weeks, our economy more than doubled, and there was massive economic growth, and there was a lot of growth in a lot of sectors, and this trickles down to the populace. And people like to spend money. So there's a lot of consumerism going on, and part of this consumerism is in the form of buying home. And this is going to lead to suburbia or suburban life, which we'll talk about in more detail. But the one thing I want you to see is a trend, and you could maybe call that causation, but the idea that economic affluence is going to lead to more consumerism. So abundance, I don't want to say it necessarily causes consumerism, but that would be the historical thinking skill that you'd be encountering there, would be causation of good economy, more consumerism. And in this era, good economy is going to lead to the growth of the suburbs, where people don't want to stay in the city where they're working. Now with the automobile and with better infrastructure, they can move out in almost like concentric circles further away from the cities. Okay, other things I want to talk about, just briefly touch on. After World War II, unions are staying strong. Unionization was a big deal during World War II, but after World War II, unions are staying strong, and the AFL and the CIO were kind of competing unions, and we're going to see them in '55. They're going to merge into one big union. So it's a union of unions. So the AFL and the CIO and other unions are seeing stability, but they're not really experiencing a lot of gains in union membership post World War II. More just staying stable. And part of that is right to work states. And part of that is just the point of a union seems to decline, or the need for a union seems to decline in a time of economic abundance. So when the economy is doing well, unions aren't seen as a necessary thing because what do you have to fight for? Better wages? You're going to get better wages when the economy is growing, right? Maybe some perks, but are you really going to fight for like that extra few days of vacation or a little bit extra um, as far as what your health insurance package is or your retirement package is? Probably not. So unions seem to lose somewhat of their appeal during times of economic prosperity. All right. Also, in this era, we see massive advancements in the medical field. So, medicine, a couple things that occur that are revolutionary in society right now. One is the use of antibiotics. Antibiotics were developed in the late 20s, but they're starting to hit the scene in this era and become mainstream medically, and that's a game changer. So, things that would have been fatal infections before are now very easily treatable thanks to antibiotics. Also, the Salk vaccine, and this is a big one, the polio vaccine. Infantile paralysis, which is what polio had been called, uh, was affecting a lot of people annually until Jonas Salk develops the polio vaccine. And his breakthrough with the polio vaccine really leads to a development of a lot of other vaccines. So illnesses that were debilitating for some children, even if it's just a small. I mean, if you look at coronavirus right now, it's got a very low mortality rate, but it could have a high infection rate, but it's got a very low mortality rate. But it's concerning to people, right? So some illnesses that had a very low mortality rate, but could possibly affect a lot of people, it was causing concern in our society, and through vaccination, we were able to eliminate a lot of that threat. I mean, just think of things that have been eliminated, like polio, mostly gone. Smallpox, not really a thing anymore, right? Not too many people get measles or mumps or rubella or tetanus or other things like that thanks to vaccination. So Jonas Salk and his breakthrough would be patterns of change if you're looking at your historical thinking skills. Okay, television, TV is a game changer. So in this era, let's turn my notes real quickly. In this era, TV is a game changer, and it's socially homogenizing. Whereas if you want to make an argument for change with your historical thinking skills, modern TV is mostly streaming. It's not everyone's watching the same thing, right? There's so many options to stream, and you can watch it at whatever pace you want to watch it. That it's not a homogenizing force so much as it used to be. Okay, flying on into the space race, y'all. Um, you may be able to hear it's pouring rain, so you might be getting that sound in the background. All right, space race. We're in the middle of the Cold War, and Russia beats us to space with a satellite, right? So 1957 Sputnik, it's up in space, and the Russians are like, "What? What do you have, America? We have a satellite in space. That's right. What do you have? Nothing." So this really concerns a lot of people because we had initially viewed Russia as just an adversary, but that adversary that could never hang on the same level as us. Whereas in 57, when Sputnik hit space, we're concerned and we're realizing that if we don't step our game up, that they may beat us in the Cold War technologically. Because if they have better satellite technology, what other technology do they have that's better than ours? So really, this could be tied to American affluence. We have in the 50s a mindset of we're living large, we've got a lot of money, we don't really need to work extremely hard as a whole society to win in the Cold War. But once Sputnik goes up, we start seeing a massive emphasis on STEM fields. So things that focus on anything that can help us win the space race. And we're going to see Kennedy's going to vow to put a man on the moon and by the end of the decade of the 60s, which we do end up doing with the Apollo space program. So once Russia launches Sputnik, that really helps us kick off our space program. And it's part of the reason why we're so dominant even to this day with the field of space technology, aerospace. I'm going to pause just for a second and see if there are any questions. So hit me up in the comments if there are any questions. Okay, not seeing anything. So if you can think of anything or if it comes in a minute later from lag time, I'll make sure to answer that. Okay, now I had mentioned the affluent society. There's a term for this that was coined. It was an actual film. It was a documentary. It's called affluenza, which is the idea of like the infectious nature of affluence, or the disease of prosperity. Um, like, why were we doing it? Well, the main causes. Okay, great question. So, main causes of the space race. So, we're thinking if we can assert our dominance in space and show that we have better space technology, that it's going to help us show our dominance in other fields, right? So if we're really good at space, like one thing I think a concern is what if we can weaponize space, or what if the Soviets can weaponize space, right? But the other thing I think is just one-upmanship, where if you put a satellite in space, we're going to put people on the moon, because if we can do that, then we can show you there's no way that you'll win the Cold War. I think part of the reason why we're putting people on the moon in the space race is just to show that there's no way that they can hang with us. And if they can't hang with us in the science and technology and aerospace departments, they can't hang with us in any department. So it shows A, we've got a budget big enough to finance it. B, it shows we have scientists that have the know-how to do this. C, it shows we have the engineering capability to do this. So it shows that we have a lot of capabilities in a lot of very precise and difficult fields. So I think that it's our way of flexing during the Cold War. But I also think in the back of our mind, there's always the concern of weaponizing space. Um, so good question. Any other questions before I move into affluenza? Okay, so affluent society. So there's a massive push for consumerism in this era. Um, Consumerism is driven by a great economy. Um, so we have a great economy, so people consume, and then consumerism drives the economy. And part of the reasons why the economy is doing well, military spending would be one, infrastructure spending would be another, and then just consumerism in general. A lot of people coming back from the war, or people that worked during the war, finally having consumer goods to purchase. Interstates um, are driving suburban growth, and the mindset of suburbia is consumerism. So the Interstate Highway Program, which is established, part of why it's established is to provide evacuation routes in the event of thermonuclear warfare. But there's the added side benefit of it allows for suburbs to flourish. So one thing you should know, you might have seen in your reading, is Levittown. And Levittown is housing complexes that are suburban housing complexes. So think of like any housing development where you'll see like this housing development starting in the 250s, and it's cookie cutter houses, just boom, 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 same house, same house, same house. That would be kind of like Levittown, and the idea of the comforts of suburbia while having access to the city is what really drives this movement away from the city. Um, Fast food would be iconic in this era. The development of fast food, the instant gratification mind that we see that's so prevalent now, really starts developing in the late 40s into the 60s in a post-war society. And so fast food chains start developing, and it's part of this consumer mindset. So you could make a connection if you wanted to. I think the mindset of fast food today would be streaming technology. So fast food in the 50s, streaming technology today. If you were to make a connection, that'd be the connection I'd make. Something your book points out, just by way of hitting on this, gender roles are reinforced in this era. So we see, a big emphasis at women staying at home, men going out to work, single income households. This is going to change in the 60s, and we'll talk about Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique, and those impacts down the road. Okay, rock and roll. Rock and roll is a big social or cultural change. So we see minorities, and I would argue that the seeds of rock and roll are planted during the Harlem Renaissance. So Harlem Renaissance, 1920s, African Americans have a massive influence on music, on literature, and on art. And the music, like jazz and blues, that starts during the Harlem Renaissance is going to come into its own in a new genre of rock and roll. And Elvis is going to be the man that really is seen as driving rock and roll during this era. So Elvis Presley is a white American, and your book has a quote by a music producer that said if he could find a white man that had an African American sound, then he would be a billionaire. And so we see here you could point to um, the idea that minorities are oppressed, and that since people didn't want to listen to minorities' music, it took a white male to make that music popular. Now that would work on your AP exam, I think. So I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm saying that that's the direction the AP exam is going, so you could make that connection. Okay. Any questions up to this point? I've still got more material to go through, but I just want to make sure that I'm pausing for questions. Okay, two other things to hit on. Poverty. There still is poverty even during the time of affluence, and a lot of times it's the minorities that are hit hardest with poverty. So the success in economic growth is not across the board. It's not a level playing field. Also, there's still racial oppression during this time period, but this is going to allow us to segue into the successes of the civil rights movement during this era. So one last pause for questions before I get into the civil rights movement. Okay, let's get into civil rights. So the main thing you should know from this is with the civil rights movement, the really big case that really changes everything is Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. So if you just want to know Brown v. Board, that's fine, or Brown v. Board of Education, that's fine. But you do need to know this case. You cannot not know this case. Okay. Um, so Brown versus the Board of Education. The reason this case is so impactful is it overturns separate but equal, which had been the doctrine that was established under Plessy versus Ferguson. So Plessy v. Ferguson, back in 1896, sets up the doctrine of separate but equal, and Brown versus Board of Education, about 60 years later, overturns that. And this is based on the idea there was an African American girl, African American girl, who lived very close to a white school. I mean, we're talking a few hundred yards from a white school. But she was forced to walk miles to an African American only school. And so she sues, and the court rules that that is not equal. It is separate, yes, but it is not equal. So schools, this case rules that schools need to start desegregating. But there's massive, massive resistance to desegregation in the South, particularly in Little Rock. There's civil unrest in Little Rock over the idea of desegregation. We actually have states, like governors of states, actively resisting desegregation in schools. So they do not want African Americans to integrate in schools with whites. But we're going to see that eventually they are going to be forced to desegregate to include African Americans into their schools. But there's a lot of resistance, and this is going to cause long-term resistance to the civil rights movement in the South. But Brown v. Board of Education is going to start, it's almost like the beginning of an avalanche that adds a lot of momentum to the civil rights movement. So had it not been for Brown v. Board of Education, I don't think we would have seen the same level of success of the civil rights movement in the 60s. Okay, bus boycotts. We'll get into this in more detail in coming days, but Montgomery bus boycotts are another thing that is part of the civil rights movement that is started all by the success of Brown v. Board of Education. But we will get in detail, in depth, into these bus boycotts in coming chapters. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I'm saying it's a connection you can make is Montgomery bus boycotts being linked to not necessarily directly caused by, but gaining traction because of the success of Brown v. Board of Education. And Martin Luther King Jr., again, we'll get into greater detail on him in coming lessons. But he gets more traction and more success because of the success of Brown v. Board of Education. Yeah, Sam, sit-ins and freedom rides. Yeah, those are good things to know. We will get into that in later lessons, but yeah, sit-ins and freedom rides. When we get into, I think it's chapter 30. Don't quote me on that, but I think chapter 30 is where we start getting into sit-ins and freedom rides. But those are good things to know, where they are protests and they're civil rights-based protests. And I think that those add even more momentum to the civil rights movement and help the overall success. What I just want you to get today, though, is Brown v. Board of Education is the starting point, and all these other movements start building on the success of Brown v. Board of Education. Any other questions from the civil rights movement? Just hit my email up real quick to see if anyone else emailed about the live stream issues. Nope, we're good to go. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about today in the chapter is Eisenhower during the Cold War. All right, so Eisenhower during the Cold War is a military man at the helm of the nation during a time of international tension. Um, let me see here, just to clarify. Yeah, Sam, that's exactly right. Brown versus Board of Education. It overturns the previous Supreme Court ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson. So Plessy v. Ferguson was separate but equal. Brown versus Board of Education applies. See, Supreme Court cases are very specific in their scope. So Brown versus Board of Education is going to limit segregation in schools, and it's going to limit segregation somewhat at the federal and at some state levels. But what we're going to see is more success in the civil rights movement that builds on this, because you're still, as an employer, you're allowed to, as a private employer, a private business owner, you're allowed to discriminate against minorities until the Civil Rights Act of '64. All right, so Plessy v. Ferguson allows for segregation at the private level and at the public or governmental level. So public institutions are allowed to segregate as well. Brown versus Board is going to level that a little bit and say it's going to limit segregation at the governmental level to some extent, but we're not going to see segregation totally being outlawed until the Civil Rights Act of '64. Great question. Okay, now back to Eisenhower. And anytime you guys have questions, guys, just hit me up in the comments section. I'll take a look, okay? Eisenhower, he's a military man. He's at the helm during the Cold War. And he takes a very strong stance during the Cold War. Some terms you should know about Eisenhower or relate to Eisenhower during the Cold War. One big one is mutually assured destruction. And this is part of massive retaliation. So massive retaliation is the idea that if you drop one bomb on us, we drop all of our bombs on you. Okay? So it is a disproportionate response. And this is to keep the Soviets from attacking us with nuclear weapons. So if it was just a proportional response, well, what if they nuke LA and then we nuke St. Petersburg and they nuke DC and we nuke Moscow, back, forth, that's going to be bad. But if the threat is you nuke us once, we just nuke your entire country. That's going to make them think long and hard about using nuclear weapons. So Eisenhower takes a very, very strong stance. And he also uses something called brinkmanship. And brinkmanship is the idea of you push your enemy to the brink of war to get what you want. It's basically like nuclear chicken. So we're hoping they blink first. And Eisenhower was willing to push really hard sometimes against the Soviets in order to get what we wanted. But they had to be sure that he was willing to actually go to war. And that's part of brinkmanship. You can't just bluff and not be willing to go. Like he was actually willing to go to war with brinkmanship. Okay, other things under Eisenhower. I talked about the Highway Act in '56, where we're going to see the highway system, interstate highway system, is going to be put into place largely as a defense measure, but hey, it has a lot of added benefits. I mean, just look at the transportation system we have in our nation today through the Interstate Highway Act. It provides for ease of travel of goods, but it also was supposed to allow quick evacuation in the case of nuclear war. But let's be honest, if the Soviet Union launched an intercontinental ballistic missile and we had a half an hour or so, you're not going to get very far in your evacuation on the highway system. But it allowed people to feel better, right? So this is a morale booster. Another issue during Eisenhower's time in office, some issues that he encountered. One was the Suez Crisis. So France and Britain are going to seize the Suez Canal, and there's a lot of international pushback against them. And our fear is that if pro-Western governments are taking control of the Suez Canal and Middle Eastern governments are pushing back, that the Soviets are going to come in and they're going to say, hey, you need a big, strong ally on your side to make sure that doesn't happen to you. And so America really plays hardball against Britain and against France, saying, you need to stop this right now, because if you don't stop this, this is going to cause an international incident. So think about this. Our World War II allies are kind of counting on us for support when they seize the Suez Canal, and we don't give it to them. Now, there's a very good reason we don't give it to them, because had we given them support, it would have probably pushed a lot of Middle Eastern nations into the arms of the Soviet Union, and that would have just been a nightmare to navigate. But they're expecting our support because we supported them during World War II. They supported us during World War II. We've got the whole UN thing going on right now together. But the Suez Crisis was a very tricky situation to navigate, and we put a little distance between ourselves and our allies. Also, Cuba falls to communism during the Eisenhower administration. And that's going to present challenges of its own, because we're going to see the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is going to occur under Kennedy, is going to happen largely because Cuba falls to communism. So had Cuba not fallen to communism, we wouldn't have seen the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's a really big deal, which we'll talk about. I mean, we have nuclear weapons literally a minute's launch, like 5 minutes launch from Cuba to hitting the Florida Keys and hitting the bottom of the peninsula of Florida. Okay, let's see. Another really big one, it doesn't get talked about a lot, is the U-2 crisis, right? Where we have a spy plane that is shot downish or crashes, and this causes a big international ripple because we're spying and we're kind of like, we're not spying on you, Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union's like, then what's this spy plane? And then we have to kind of be like, oops, busted. And while you might not think that's a big deal, it's a really big deal, because we were just making inroads with the Soviet Union, and we were starting, like, Eisenhower was set for a meeting, all right? He was set to meet in Paris. The U-2 crisis happens, and the meeting's off. All right, so we actually were going to make some inroads with the Soviet Union and possibly cool down a little bit of the Cold War, which was starting to heat up a lot. But pretty much any progress Eisenhower had made with the Soviet Union during this time period, it's wiped out. It'd be kind of like, you know, if you had hurt a friend emotionally, like if you had done something that they felt like was a betrayal, and you had just started making inroads, and then you did something again that distanced them from you. That's what's going on here with the Soviet Union and the U-2 crisis. So the Eisenhower administration, some good things, I think, would be his hardball policies with the Soviet Union. We did need it at this time. But bad things would be U-2 crisis and just generally loss of any advancement we had made in negotiating with the Soviets. All right, I know it's a lot today, guys. I know I covered a lot of material, but we needed to get through a lot of this material today, and I appreciate you being attentive during this time period. So, any final questions you have before I close out of the stream? Haha. All right. Yes, Vivian. The plan is College Board is currently working on right now making 2 dates for a mobile, like an at-home version of the AP exam where you would remotely take the AP exam. So they are making those options, and starting on Wednesday, they have training. They have education classes, prep classes for the AP exam, which I'm going to make sure that you all get into. So they're going to have daily sessions to prep you for the online version of the AP exam. Great question. Other questions? I'll give it a little bit. I appreciate you guys and the work you've been putting in. You guys have been putting in quality work, and I know this is a big adjustment for you guys. You guys are killing it. You're knocking it out of the park. So good work so far, guys. Make sure you keep checking your AP US History Crash Course guides. If you have any questions at all, email me. I mean, I'm checking my email every few minutes. So I've got my phone set to notify me. I've got my laptop up a lot. So any questions, email me anytime. We're going to be doing more of these live streams. I'm probably going to keep them shorter, but while you guys are doing the AP exam prep through College Board, I'll keep it just like probably 15 minutes or less. And I might experiment with Zoom so I can actually see your faces and you can see me if you want to do that. But I really appreciate everything you guys are doing and how you're adapting. You guys are doing a great job. All right, last call for questions. There's a little bit of lag on the question, so I'm going to get like 20 more seconds. Five more seconds, y'all. All right, guys, have a good weekend. Make sure you study for the quiz. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and email me anytime. All right, see you guys.